Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Yawa Hansen-Quao. I'm the Executive Director of Emerging Public Leaders, and today's webinar, we are privileged to have an esteemed panel of young leaders from Ghana and Liberia to discuss with us the importance of elections. There are elections coming up both in Ghana and in Liberia. And today's discussion will really help us to focus on the participation of young people. We want to understand really what's at stake. There's been a lot of research that shows that so many young people, not just in Africa, but around the world, are feeling a lot of apathy when it comes to politics, when it comes to governance issues. And this, in many ways, is affecting the participation of young people in elections. I'm sure you may have followed the news of the US election, which has been topical, and there have been matters arising from that. And on Monday, December 7th, Ghana, the country that I'm from, and the country I'm speaking to you from, will be going to the polls. On the 8th of December, Liberia will be holding senatorial elections as well. And so we thought it would be great to convene a panel to discuss really what's at stake for young people, especially in who are electing leaders in a time of a global pandemic. So as I said, I am Executive Director of Emerging Public Leaders, and at Emerging Public Leaders, we believe that young people hold the key to Africa's future. We offer a 2-year fellowship program that gets the best and brightest young people from across Africa, encouraging them and training and supporting them to work in government service. So I have the great pleasure of leading a team of really dynamic leaders, and we recruit lots of great fellows. Our work has its roots in Liberia, so I'm excited to introduce to you our panel that comprises of participants both from Liberia and here in Ghana. So if I may start with introductions, I want to first introduce Mr. H. Zaizay. H is the current executive director of the President's Young Professionals Program of Liberia. Now, the PYPP is an organization that has existed for over 10 years and has been working to strengthen the capacity of young people and works as a partner to the government of Liberia, helping them to get excellent and competent ethical leaders into government service. The PYPP is the organization that inspired the creation of Emerging Public Leaders. And so we are very much sister organizations and proud to be affiliated and associated with each other. So H. Zaizay, you are welcome to today's panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Our second panelist for today is a member of the inaugural cohort of Public Service Fellows in Ghana with the Emerging Public Leaders Program. Her name is Esther Spio, Esther Emmanuella Spio, and she currently works for the Ministry of Finance and is part of the inaugural alumni community of fellows here in Ghana. Esther herself has ambitions to be involved in public service in the future, and she is off to a wonderful start as a civil servant working for the government of Ghana. Esther Spio, thank you so much for joining us, and you are welcome to today's discussion as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yawa.
And last, but certainly not the least, it is our great pleasure to have a member of the PYPP with us. She is Elizabeth Horace kwemie, and she is a former or part of the alumni community of the President's Young Professionals Program in Liberia. And she is speaking to us from Monrovia, as is H. And we are so excited to have her here to share some of her reflections, especially as Liberia goes to the polls in the coming days. Elizabeth currently, I understand, works for the Ministry of of Finance, I believe.
Of Health.
I hope I got that right.
Health.
Oh, forgive me. Ministry of Health in Liberia. Thank you so much for the correction. And we're so excited to have her here to join us for this really important discussion today. So to set the stage, again, as I said, there have been a lot of reports that detail that there is an increasing state of apathy among young people across the world when it comes to political leadership and governance issues. And I want to start off by asking H to, he has led the PYPP for several years and was himself in government, working for the Ministry of Gender, and has seen a wide arc of what has evolved over the years in terms of youth participation in governance. So, H, I want to start with you and ask you, what are the trends that you may have been noticing, and what truly is at stake, especially as both Ghana and Liberia are going to the polls in the coming days?
Thank you, Yawa, and good afternoon to everyone. As you rightly introduced the PYPP, Yawa, we were established to serve as a channel for strengthening institutional capacity in the public service for effective service delivery, and our target are promising young Liberian college graduates. And I want to begin on the promising young college graduate role in the public service that makes me or that raises my concern about the question on what's at stake for the Liberia elections. You all may be aware, Liberia has gone through a period of civil unrest and civil crisis, and we enjoyed the first democratic elections after the civil crisis that brought into power the first female president in Africa, President Ellen Johnson's to leave. And that election the essence of democracy, the true power of elections in terms of giving people the opportunity to choose their leaders and determine who's going to lead them over the period of time. So what is this? I want to begin with what will young people look forward to from the elections here in Liberia? How do they see their role in identifying and selecting who's going to lead them in the House of Senate, because it's the senatorial election that is being held, and also a referendum, which I hope we will talk about more. But what's at stake is that how do young people view the elections process? How do young people view the important role they play in terms of selecting who's going to govern them or who's going to lead them over the coming years in the House of Senate? And how do they use their voice? And their voices here will mean the power to choose. They go into the polls and they're identifying and selecting exactly who's going to lead them. And this is going to be a huge determining factor, ability to exercise democracy in the way that people enjoyed it, but also getting people into power who are actually going to deliver on key promises, but who are actually going to ensure that government is able to deliver effective services to the people.
Great. Well, thank you, H. And I think that that's such an articulation of what every person who votes hopes for, that they will elect leaders that truly represent them. If I can come to you, Elizabeth, you currently work as a technical assistant to the Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Health. And this is the first time, at least in my lifetime, that we're voting in the midst of a global health pandemic. Do you think that this will affect the outcome or the turnout, rather, people's willingness to come out and actually cast their votes? And what are you hearing, especially among young people in Liberia? Is health on the agenda? Is it at stake? Is it on the table? Will it make a big difference in who they choose or whether or not they show up to the polls?
Thank you very much, Yawa, and I'm glad to form a part of this panel. So relative to health and the elections, I think it's important that we discuss some of these because currently in our country, like around the world, we're currently having the issue of the pandemic. But in the US, we don't see our people complain about leadership issues relative to the management of the pandemic. However, as it relates to who we elect and what contributions they will make that will shift the destiny of the health sector is also very critical. So young people currently are engaging political aspirants on what their platforms are, because like Ish said, ours is a midterm election. By December 8th, we should be electing 15 new senators. And the Senate is such a critical component of our governance structure. And so allotments that come to the health sector, the adequacy of the allotment to run our health programs, and all of those are squarely in the purview of the legislature. So the role they play in helping to keep up our basic social services is very critical. So these elections, people are being critical of them on what they have to offer relative to the change in the healthcare that we envisage, where we will now be flying our citizens out of here to Ghana, to your country. Most often we have our people fly over, even during this pandemic, we have had a couple of our government officials fly over to your country, even in the midst of the pandemic, to seek better healthcare because of the challenges we currently have in our sector. So we're looking forward to electing a new corps of senators that are going to see reason to invest in our healthcare sector, that's going to see reason to put more money into services that would benefit the Liberian populace. And as young people are a majority in our population, any decision that comes out of the elections on December 8th will by and large affect us, will by and large affect all of our basic social services, because the Senate is there to make allotments, budgetary allotments, and funding sources that come to the country. The final determination is from our lawmakers, so their leadership is very critical. Integrity issues sometimes have the country to get less than what it should get from their donor partners and all of those. So it's very critical in terms of getting our healthcare system to what it is to be able to respond to pandemics, because we have suffered Ebola and now it's Corona. So we have suffered double shock and it has affected our healthcare system tremendously. So we're looking forward to electing people who will be able to bring us out of the dungeon of the challenges that we face right now into a better healthcare system.
Well, thank you for that. And I couldn't agree with you more that, especially because of the global health pandemic, I think many voters will be thinking about who is best placed to improve the health sector in general. So let me come to you, Esther Spio. You are in Ghana. You are a member of, you are a public servant. What is topical on your mind as we go into the presidential and parliamentary elections on Monday? And also, I'm curious about whether your perspectives have changed since you've come into government.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Yawa. I think in general, elections usually offer young people in Ghana and across the world an opportunity for them to influence decision making. It's like a time for them to get the politicians to really deliver on their promises. And so generally everybody is looking forward to these elections, even though there is a general sense of apathy because people think that over the years in Ghana, two dominant political parties have been ruling, and some of them, they really can't see the difference. But then again, too, there is no viable third option, according to most people, I mean, in my cycles. So the issue is, well, we want there to be development, and we are not seeing what the viable options are with the third parties. But others are also saying, then we will just stay away from the elections. But most definitely, that might not be a good decision for everybody. But then everybody is having different thoughts as to what they are supposed to do. About joining the civil service. The civil service generally in Ghana really does not sell well amongst young people. If not for the fact that unemployment is on the high, you realize that if a young person gets the opportunity to choose between a private sector opportunity and a public service sector opportunity, the person would obviously opt for a private sector opportunity. And so prior to entering the civil service, the civil service generally didn't have a good name. And one thing that I used to think about when I was outside of the service that has changed when I entered is the issue that has to do with bureaucracy. So people generally complain that in the civil service, it takes so long for you to get work to be done. And I used to complain with them when I was outside the service. But then upon entering the service, you realize that all those measures are necessary to ensure that there are checks, appropriate checks and balances, because in the civil service, records are very, very important. And so you need to ensure that you leave the appropriate trails on every transaction that you are dealing with. So then now I came to appreciate the reason why there's a bureaucracy. And of course, it doesn't mean that it is all good. I mean, more work needs to be done in terms of ensuring that there's efficient delivery of goods and services. So for me, that is one thing that has changed. The second thing that I would say that has changed is the issue of publicity, as in civil servants really selling their work. So prior to joining the service, there was this notion about civil servants not going to work early, but then they are the first people to close, and it looks like they're really not doing anything. So we had that general notion. But upon entering the service, you realize that there's actually a lot of work, and specifically, I'm going to speak for my ministry. Realize that being a central government agency, there's so many things that goes on because we handle the finances of the government. You see that people really come to work early and then they close very late as well, especially in the budget seasons. So now the question was, if civil servants here really work that hard, how come people don't get to hear about it? So I think moving on, it behoves on us as young people who have entered into the service to ensure that we publicize the work that the civil servants do so that other people can get to learn and also get to appreciate what we do. Yeah, so I think in general, prior to now, people were wondering how the elections was going to be, and everybody in the midst of the pandemic, we were all a little bit skeptical. But then we witnessed our voters registration exercise in July, and we realized that the voter turnout was high, about 70 million people. So I think that although the pandemic is going to play a role in the turnout, looking at how people went to register for the ID, we are safe to think that a lot more people are going to show up to vote. And you also look at the euphoria surrounding the campaigns that is going on, and you realize that most people turn up for the campaign that is ongoing by the various politicians. So then again, we can safely say that, well, we are going to have a high turnout. And then One other thing that points to the fact that the pandemic really at this time might not be a factor, maybe probably after the elections, is the special voting that we had on the 1st of December for security agencies and then people of the media who would be engaged on the day of voting. You realize that there was also a high turnout on the day of special voting, because sometimes in constituencies that are supposed to be having about 800 voters ended up recording close to like 600 voters casting their ballot on that day. So, I think the pandemic is going to play a role, but in terms of affecting the general turnout, we might be up for a surprise.
Thank you, Esther. I think that's an interesting perspective. The statistics show that Africa has the youngest population in the world, the continent with the youngest median age. And that means majority of the people going into elections this year on this continent as voters are young. I was involved as a speaker and a mentor for a program that was really targeting first-time female voters to encourage them to register. And we heard things like, yes, I'm going to go get registered to vote because I can use my voter's ID card as, my ID. But I don't actually intend to vote because, I don't see a difference that people, these politicians make in our lives. I'm curious what you're hearing among your peers. It sounds like you are sold about why it's important, but do you get the sense that young people around you will actually show up? Esther, let me ask you, then I'll move it to Elizabeth as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Yawa. It's very true. I mean, amongst my peers, this issue comes up. I mean, getting the voter's ID is very important. And so most of my colleagues wanted to have the card. But then again, about voting, whether they are going to cast their ballot on that day, that was a bit of a challenge. And I think that is what contributes to the general apathy amongst the young people. And from my cycles, what we realize is young people are kind of a bit skeptical because they think, okay, so over the years, we've been voting for these dominant political parties, and we are not really seeing in terms of improved livelihoods. We are not really seeing in terms of probably money in our pockets and all. But then again, they are not seeing a third viable option. People think that, okay, what about trying the third parties? But these third parties, if you look at their performance over the electoral cycle, haven't really been getting a lot of votes. So yes, people want change, people want there to be development, but as to who is going to bring it, it's more of like a choice between the lesser evil amongst my colleagues. So either you go and choose the lesser evil, or you just stay at home when voters, they just keep your ID. But then again, too, young people are being encouraged to go and vote because that's the way that you can cause the change. At least if you look at it from the angle of your vote as a single person, it might not look like it will count much. But then if you look at your friends, their friends, and their friends' friends, together we can form like a formidable force. So I think staying away is not the best option, though, even though people don't think that there's a viable option. But then again, too, how can we ensure that we come together to form a formidable force? There was the issue of having none of the above some time ago on the ballot paper. So rather than casting a ballot for any of the presidential aspirants, what about people choosing for none of the above, so that we can quantify the number of people who are tired? And when this issue came up, some of my colleagues were in support of it, because if you stay at home, you cannot really tell how much of an influence you can be to the system. But if there was a situation where the EC could tally the number of people that actually voted for none of the above, then I think if we have the numbers, we can push for a legislation or something that can actually influence our current democratic makeup. Maybe probably we might ask for more independent candidates or something. So just conversations going around, how can we ensure that our voices are heard, and even though there's general apathy, how can we make sure that we form a formidable force, even if we decide to stay away? So going around that.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting concept. None of the above as an option on the ballot paper. It would be really interesting to see how many people select that. So Elizabeth, let me come to you. What are you hearing among your peers, young people in general? Do you get the sense that people will actually show up, even though they may be holding strong opinions in private conversations? Do you think they will actually leave their homes and cast a vote?
So it's interesting. It's quite interesting, and despite the general apathy among the young people, I think the enthusiasm of late has increased, because sometimes at one point or the other, we all thought that maybe we should just let it be. Like for me personally, I reached the point after the 2017 elections, and I was like, I will not go back home where I'm from in Bassa to vote anymore, because for every time we go back home, the people who vote for those that do nothing for us are more than us. So what's the essence? What's the need? Why should I keep going back? So we all had those thoughts at one point in time or the other. But again, we come to the realization that we're not going to get there until we insist and persist that this change that we want to see, we must be a part of it. So in as much as young people, to a large extent, are kind of faint and think that they keep electing people who disappoints them, the current enthusiasm that I see amongst young people in the young community is very high. I think young people are going to turn up in the mass, because the voter registration was done 2017, but of recent there was some regularization process for lost cards and all of those. And we saw at the different precincts, the pool of people standing online anxious to renew their voter cards, because these elections on December 8th is very critical. The ruling party has announced that they must win all of the seats. So to have a ruling party dominate the legislature and the opposition sit outside and do nothing is not going to give us that balanced kind of system, the check and balances that are required. So the young people have figured out that these elections are very critical. And so it's better not to sit down, but to have a campaign. So a lot of the youth groups are out there in the communities encouraging folks to turn out to vote, because it's not going to happen when we get tired, but it's going to happen when we keep rising up to the occasion and ensuring that we make the right choices. So if our mistakes in the past were not choosing the right people, how can we do it differently this time? So there are a lot of education amongst young people in the different communities. And I tell you what, some of these initiatives are self-sponsored by young people, just to ensure that young people do not get tired of voting, because they have not seen what they want to see. They've not seen basic services being accorded them. They've not seen our educational system being up to the standard where young people can go to school and acquire quality in education. But we're insisting, and the campaign is that young people of Liberia would insist on voting the right people. And one day we're optimistic that we might just get the right group of people elected, and we might just get some of the changes that we anticipate in our country. So of course, the enthusiasm is high. There's going to be a lot of turnout. Even in the midst of the pandemic, the campaigns, the rallies were huge, and a lot of people came out. So that's an indication that once people are ready to come out to campaign for the different candidates, they are going to come out to make sure that those candidates in whom they believe get elected come December 8th.
Well, I'm encouraged to hear that there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm among young people in Liberia. And I do hope that that translates into them showing up to actually cast their votes. You know, there's been a lot of interesting trends that I've noticed, at least. Ghana will be in the polls on Monday. And for the first time, there's a female vice presidential candidate on the ticket of one of the major parties. I want to ask you, as someone that I know is really passionate about gender issues, you used to work at the Ministry of Gender. In Ghana, the current statistic 51% of the Ghanaian population comprises women. We are only represented in parliament, I think currently at just 13%. So I'm curious what you're seeing and what trends you're noticing among women's participation, both as candidates, but also as voters. And how do you think that that will play out in your upcoming elections?
Okay, yeah, that's an important factor to consider in these elections. And even though I will know more about the Liberia elections more than the Ghana, but I'd like to say here that I want to talk a little bit about what Esther did speak about young people forming formidable foes in terms of being actually the ones who are taking the decisions during these elections, because you will get to know first that many young people do not see themselves as very critical to these elections, but the politicians do see young people as very critical to these elections. So they're targeting the younger population. They're making ambitious promises and promises that they may not even be able to deliver on if they're voted. I listened to VOA this morning and I heard Kofi Annan speak about these elections in Ghana, and he referenced three key areas that he thinks voters should actually evaluate the parties on: education, healthcare, and corruption. And I'm telling myself that okay, Kofi Annan, I hear you, but I think I should say that to Liberia too, because I think these are the critical issues in both countries: education, healthcare, especially considering the pandemic situation right now we are in, and corruption. And this is where I think the question around gender representation, female representation, and when you talk about gender representation, I also wanted to include the youth as a gender and how they play a lot of role in these deciding moments, which are the elections. But sad to say, and I'm happy that we have a female vice presidential candidate in Ghana. It tells me that there's a paradigm shift around our perception of politics in West Africa and in Africa, because you have a lot of females going in. But in my experience, you do have a lot of females going into the process, but the outcome of the process produces fewer females, if no female at all. Currently in Liberia, and we are going through to the senatorial elections, you'll be amazed to know that we have only one female seated at the House of Senate. Okay, and these elections are producing a lot more female candidates, and I'm glad you brought this up, because this has been the discussion at the community level, in civil society, and amongst other thought leaders, as to how many political parties are producing candidates within the 15 counties we will be voting for our senators. And it was interesting to know that the conversations around on the radio, on social media, and on the mainstream media was evaluating political parties by the number of female candidates they are putting forth to these elections, because for the senatorial elections, every political party is putting forth 15 different candidates, one person per
County.
for each county. And I think this is something we as voters, we as young people should get to know that at the helm of the greatest decision making, whether it's in the executive like you, the president or the vice president, or is at the legislature with Liberia, with the House of Senate or the House of Representatives, our voices will be heard and translated into strong policies, into laws, into decisions and outcomes of those decisions based on our representation. So it's key that we actually focus on that. And I think amongst the young voters here in Liberia, there has been a lot of questions female representation at the level of the Senate. And I think that is going to influence a lot of voters' decision when they vote for those who are running for the.
Thank you, H. And I think that I cannot talk about a woman as a vice presidential candidate on a major political party's ticket in Ghana without acknowledging the fact that it was smaller political parties in Ghana that started, to recognize women first. So, back to the conversation around the dominant political parties versus the smaller parties that tend to have good policies, but don't get the support at the polls. I think that often leads to a bit of disenchantment with the processes with a lot of young people. As we're seeing over the past few months in Nigeria, for example, there seems to be an awakening amongst young people about the voice and the power of their voice that they have. And to borrow your words, Esther, you talked about, young people as a formidable force. And we saw lots of protest among young people in Nigeria to end police brutality with the End SARS movement. And, I wonder whether you feel like we're in a different moment where African young people are truly recognizing the power that they have and are willing to channel it into how they vote. But secondly, do you think that this will also influence young people's decisions to perhaps participate in governance themselves? So, for example, putting themselves as candidates in upcoming elections, or even, looking at joining the civil service or public service, as you have, Esther. I wonder what your thinking is on that.
I agree with you, Yawa, that if you actually follow the trends of events in Africa over the period of time, you will get to know that young people have realized that first they are a critical piece of the pie, and that their voices should be heard. Their unique concerns should be put on the table during these critical decision-making processes, whether it's at the executive or at the legislature or at the judiciary. And they may not be exercising, or they may not be going about it the most prudent way. And I will want to reference the protests in Nigeria and the loss of lives and properties as a result of the protest. But I think what young people across the region, across sub-Saharan Africa, across Africa, have come to realize is that whether they come out and participate or not, the decisions taken by the processes are going to affect them directly. So the conversations around here is what can we do as young people? And I would like to reference an event that I spoke at last week, Monday, attended by the former president of Liberia, President Sirleaf. And this is a group of people that are trying to build the next generation of political leaders in Africa. and it's referred to as the Young Political School Africa. And what you're trying to do is to expose young people to what political leadership is, and inspire them to aspire to political positions in the future. And I also think with the experience of the President's Young Professionals Program and the level of enthusiasm that is being developed among young people in Liberia as to wanting to enter government. And if you speak to a lot of them, their quest to enter into governance, their quest of entering into the public service is not just spurred by their intention to get a job, but it's also spurred by the role they want to play in the decision-making processes, the role they want to play in changing how government has responded to their unique needs over the period of time. They want to be seen as part of the team and not just spectators on the field.
Yeah, thank you, H. That's a good perspective to have. Esther, can I bring this to you? I'm curious what you perceive about young people's awakening to become the formidable force that you talked about. Do you feel like this is a moment where more young people will be propelled into political awakening and run as candidates or even seek a career in public service?
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Yao, for the question. I think honestly, this is something that young people have been thinking about genuinely. How can they affect the governance process in our country? But I think the current challenge is getting the right kind of training, because as it stands now, it's like if you really want to go into politics now, if you really want to go into governance, then you might have to join through the major political parties, youth wing or association in the various educational campuses. And the only challenge that comes with that most of the time is that you end up getting people who are committed to particular political parties rather than the general good or the general development of the country. So I think that moving forward, if young people can get more like an independent training process or medium that would properly equip them, because as H said, young people have the ambition, but sometimes the process and how we go about making our voices heard becomes a challenge. So if we are able to get the right training and the right processes, and that is why programs such as EPO and the program in Liberia are essential. If you're able to get the right kind of institutions to train us towards taking up those roles, it will be very, very possible. And we can really cause the change that we really want to cause. So that is my view on that.
Thank you, Esther. Elizabeth, let me ask you. I mean, sometimes when we complain about the candidates that are presented, you know, a counter response to that is, why don't you run yourself if you feel like you can do a better job than the candidates that are on the ballot? Do you feel like young people in Liberia are sufficiently inspired to run themselves or to seek a career in public service to be the change that they're so often disillusioned about? Elizabeth, are you with me?
Sorry. So I was saying it's a two ways stuff. So it's like a lot of the young people are beginning to allow the current system, to push them to becoming more inspired to serving and taking up roles in public service because of what they're seeing around them. But now, on the other end, you have the issue of being prepared, because I am personally having a problem with people coming into public service without being adequately prepared for the challenges that they will meet in public service. For example, the President's Young Professional Program recruited us through a rigorous process, and we enter the civil service. But the challenges that you meet in the civil service are enormous. So you have integrity issues that you'll be confronted with. So I think for young people to make the difference and the kind of change that they want to see, though they want to come into civil service and service or public service to make those changes, they have to be adequately prepared. They have to prepare themselves in terms of taking up minor leadership roles in their communities and getting those kind of basic leadership skills that allow you to seek the interest of your country, to seek the good, the public good, and not personal gains. Because it's not that we don't have a lot of qualified people in government, but sometimes we have the qualified people and they're still producing lesser results. So if young people are to come into governance to make that change that we want to see, and we reach a point where we think, I think it's time for us to begin to be those very changes that we want to see. Let's rise up above campaigns for social justice, and now instead of being the ones who vote, it's now time that people will vote for us. We have to adequately prepare ourselves so that when the challenges come and struck us, we will not latch back into becoming the same people who we complain about. So I think, yes, we are kind of in the right direction of trying to engage ourselves into public service, leadership, and all of those. But on the average, it has to do with a lot of preparation so that when we come, indeed, we will make that change that the people expect of us, and some of the ills that we spoke about, will be able to correct them so that the society will view us now as those people who sat on the fence for a long time but prepared themselves, came to governance, and today they are making the kind of changes that they longed for.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you and Esther are echoing the importance of preparation, that we need more organizations that are committed to helping train, mentor, and capacitate young people to be able to become, great leaders, public leaders in whatever country they find themselves. I also, and this question is for H. I want to acknowledge that, politicians come and go, but public servants and civil servants seem to remain. So the civil service institutions that govern, that make sure public services are offered to citizens, they are kind of the institutions that remain stable regardless of who's in political leadership. Do you think we have it all wrong? I think that there's or doesn't there seem to be such an emphasis on political leadership to the detriment of, really being thoughtful about who's going into our public service institutions? Would you agree with that? And what would you say can be done to remedy it?
I think Yawa, there has been, or we may have created a disconnect between what public servants are, public servants or civil servants understanding of governance versus politicians' understanding of governance. And I would agree with you that politicians do come and go. For an example, in Ghana, if Nana Akufo-Addo loses this election to John Mahama, almost his entire cabinet will be walking off the stage and will be ushering in a new set of cabinet. And so politicians, they do come and go, but how do public servants ensure that the platforms of these politicians or the promises they make or their agenda are referred to as failed government only because of their inability to deliver on the promises they made during campaign. And politicians are not afraid to make promises. We've seen that over the period of time. They are not afraid to make promises. They could even go as far as telling you, if you die, I can resurrect you. You know, and it's only because they want the votes. But what can we, who are actually going to ensure that the promises being made of building new roads or building new hospitals or building new schools or free education for all, things that we are able to deliver. And this is where I think civil servants should be more proactive in these election processes in terms of civic education as to what is at stake. So when we're listening to these politicians, we're hearing from them. Are we hearing what's realistic, or are we just hearing what they want to say? And I will come back to the question of what is at stake. Are they actually talking about education as per what the actual education needs are, as service delivery needs are? Are they addressing the issues of corruption that has led to civil servants actually going to work and not getting paid on time? Or are they creating the environment under which civil servants are working under very deplorable conditions without access to basic equipment or basic utilities? Or so I think politicians are the ones we actually elect in offices, but public servants should be more concerned about what happens after elections. And this is where I will want to emphasize the era of preparation, as stated by Esther and Elizabeth, that how prepared are those who are coming in, not just their ability to do what they need to do, but how knowledgeable are they about the issues, and how are they actually going to address these issues should they get elected into the office?
Yeah, thank you, H. I think you're absolutely right that we have to also think about what happens post-elections, that oftentimes there's a lot of energy, euphoria, attention, and care that the entire population gives up until the election day. And then the same fervor and attention doesn't seem to last afterwards. So I greatly appreciate your comments. I know we're down to our last couple of minutes on today's discussion, but I think there have been such a tremendous amount of great insights here. I really like the idea that the three key things that are on the ballots all across Africa, really, not even just in Ghana or Liberia, are issues around education, healthcare, corruption. These are things that we hear a lot of young people resonate with. I really like the idea of young people recognizing that they are a formidable force and thinking about what we can do to help prepare them to participate in governance or in political leadership themselves. I do think that the thoughts around women's participation is crucial, because it's important that we make sure that governance is not just about the majority, but also paying attention to those who are ordinarily overlooked. And women and young people especially often fall in that category. And then lastly, I think this emphasis on post-elections, not just what happens, before and during and the day of, but also, how do we keep citizens' attention, engagement, and involvement post-elections to keep leaders accountable and to ensure that if there's any contributions that can be made towards improving governance in general, that we make them, before the next election. As we wrap up, I'd love to ask a final question to each of you. As you're giving me your final remarks, I'd love for you to also speak to any young person who's listening or watching us and thinking, you know, why should I even bother going to stand in line? And, you know, because of all of the COVID protocols, we're going to have to wear masks. You know, I can imagine that there's a lot of, you know, second guessing among young people right now about whether or not they should go and vote and whether or not their vote matters. So as you give me your final remarks, could you also speak specifically to Africa's young people and share whatever encouragement you might have about why getting involved in casting a vote this year is critical? So I'll start with you, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I think it's quite important that we had this conversation, and some of the perspective we seen or heard so far kind of what's resonating around us. So issues of education, issues of development, issues of integrity, and all of those borders around the decisions we make as young people during these elections. So I will like to encourage young people out there. So both in Ghana and Liberia, we have almost the same issues, like H quoted Kofi Annan on VOA this morning. So corruption is an issue, and I personally think that corruption contributes a lot to the poor systems that we have in place today. Little or no healthcare facilities for our people, for our children, and very poor quality of education currently in Liberia. All of those corruption contributes a lot because people take away a lot of what's supposed to be used for the public good. So we think it's about time that we use the opportunity that we have that is giving us each election to vote the right people and to keep advocating for those causes that we think will bring about change. It's not time for young people to sit back as spectators. It's time for young people to rise up and recognize that we are a formidable force that can make the change that we want to see in our different countries. It's time for young people to educate their fellow young people about the importance of the elections that we're going to. It's time for young people to take up the issues in their own hands and think about participation as well, and not just look at always going to the polls to vote. It's important to vote, but at some point in time, we need to rise beyond the occasion of just voting for others and participating directly in the processes that will lead to the change that we want to see. So young people, you are out there and we know you have a lot of energy. You are used to vote for others. Your voices should be heard in these elections. You cannot just sit there. You should rise up on December 8th and December 7th in Ghana and go out there and vote the kind of changes that you want to see. Thank you very much to the organizers of this unique discussion. I think it was fruitful and rewarding.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. H, and then Esther, I will give you the final word.
So I just want to say here, Yawa, that not voting is voting. If you sit home and didn't vote, you actually voted because you contributed to whoever won. So I think you should get out there and actually, like Elizabeth said, be a part of the process, because we are the change we've been waiting for. Thank you so much, Yawa, and thanks to everyone for organizing this webinar.
Thank you, H. And Esther.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, Elizabeth sounded like a politician. If she was on the ballot, I was going to vote for her. Moving on, as young people, if we look at the reasons why we vote, we need improved livelihoods, we need better healthcare systems, we need education, but we shouldn't limit that to what we are going to get as individuals alone from voting for a particular person or a particular party or candidate. Otherwise, we just be turning everything into clientelism, which will not be good. So as young people moving forward, we should be looking at voting for people that are going to deliver on promises, but at the same time, they would be ensuring sustainability for the future generation. Because if we leave it for politicians, they are only going to be making short-term policies, and then in future, our children might suffer. So let's vote on issues that are sustainable. Let's give opportunity to people that would be solving the problems of today, but in the same way, they'll be minding the business of the future generation as well. And then the final thing I would want to say is that we should all make sure that we contribute to the peaceful nature of Ghana's electoral process. We should make sure that we ensure peace. I think there's no point in going to cast a ballot and then causing chaos or mayhem. Once you are done casting your ballots, just come back home and then let's wait for the final declaration. We don't have to take the freedom and peace that we have in the country for granted. So that is also the final words that I would like to leave us with. Thank you.
And such a great place to end. Thank you so much to each of you panelists for joining us today on this really important discussion on what's at stake in upcoming elections in Ghana and Liberia. On behalf of emerging public leaders, I want to thank each of you. Zaizay, Executive Director of the President's Young Professional Program in Liberia, to Esther Spio, at the Ministry of Finance here in Ghana and part of the alumni community of EPL in Ghana, and Elizabeth Kwemie, thank you so much as well, technical assistant to the Minister of Health in Liberia. Thank you for your comments. And to all of our attendees, thank you for making time. I hope that if you are citizens of Ghana or Liberia, that you will go out and vote and participate. And we look forward to welcoming you on our next webinar. Thank you and have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.